Now, without further ado, let me introduce you guys to our second speaker for today's first session. His name is Carlos Schonenberg. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Carlos is from El Salvador, and he has represented the national team for 20 years. He is the founder of Squash Para Todos and also the executive director and the creator of Short Wall Squash. Carlos will be providing an overview of Squash Para Todos, and also he will be talking about outdoor squash and short wall squash, including the game in El Salvador. While he is speaking, please don't forget to put your Q&As in the Q&A section on the right so that we can ask him some questions when he's done. Carlos, are you ready?
Yes. Hi, Kenzie.
Amazing. Amazing. We are so excited to see what you have to say.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you to So I'm going to share my screen with you guys. And before getting into our outdoor project, I wanted to share some key points or triggers that I believe are important to talk about. And in our specific case, I had to go through some specific moments that Rick confirmed that the outdoor squash is the place to go. And my first reinforcement of the idea came after reading Jahangir's 555 book and learning more about Hashim Khan's story. We all know who Hashim Khan. I knew who Hashim Khan was for over 25 years, but I had no idea that he started playing squash, as it says here, in a roofless squash court. So I couldn't, after reading this, I couldn't stop thinking, what would have happened to Hashim if he wouldn't have access to that roofless squash court? And what would have happened to the history of our game if that wouldn't have happened? Now, the outdoor courts, they've been around for a while now, probably ahead of our time. From the beautiful glass court public squash built a couple of years ago to the most recent court being used, and I'm sure it's probably the most booked court in the last year, which is the steel court built by good friend Robert in New York. So one thing I want to make a lot of emphasis is that I'm promoting outdoor squash in general. What type of courts you build, that will depend on the country, the federation, the resources. Anybody will have that, see this as an opportunity. We are focusing more on the grassroots and on trying to build less expensive courts that will allow a population of players to learn the game and be introduced to the game that in any other way or in the traditional way, they wouldn't have had a chance to try the game. So about our sports history, it's very important that we remember that most of the elite athletes we follow and we admire nowadays, they probably, in most cases, didn't start their games or practicing their games in the best facilities out there. A lot of them came from really adverse situations, but that first access, that's what brought them into the game. Then after a lot of hard work and dedication, they became the elite athletes there now, the idols we admire now, and they're the ones making the real money. So there's a lot of emphasis on, I think there should be a lot of emphasis put on growing the sport backwards and getting the game to all that grassroots. Now, if there's still doubt about whether squash should go or not outdoors, I think coronavirus made the decision for us. And I know that the next speaker will address this topic, but due to the consequences or the product of being locked down, a lot of people, we squash enthusiasts, we're willing to go back to the squash court because we love squash. But for those that are looking for a new physical activity, a new sport, it only makes sense that people will look for outdoor activities. After being locked down, and there's countries that are still locked down, people will have as a first choice an outdoor activity. So I encourage the outdoor world. I know technology will play a big part to make that court a little bit more fun for people to come back, or new people to engage in the sport. But I do believe that outdoors is the next move squash has to make. Now, we've been thinking of this for a long time, but it was until early 2019 that I basically decided to listen to my heart and do what I knew and I know it's best for our program and that could help the game of squash in general. So I already knew that I wanted to go outdoors. I knew that I was going to find a front wall. Now my challenge was, how do I build the side walls, right? So, and trying to make it as inexpensive as possible without deteriorating the dynamics of the game in general. So this is an image of the first prototype. My goal at that moment was to build the cheapest squash court possible, make it work, and then proceed from that. Now, determining the sidewall heights, and I'll talk a little bit more further down the presentation, I came up with the height by watching a lot of hours of PSA matches, and even I did put some time to find some stats. And I kind of found that around 15% of the times, the balls are hitting the sidewalls above 1 meter 20 or so. And those times that the ball is hitting over 1 meter 20 or so, most of those times the athlete didn't want the ball to hit there. It was a bad shot that ended up in a losing point or an under pressure rally. So I figured that I could shave off a lot of the sidewalls. I wouldn't jeopardize the game, and I would save a lot of money probably in the construction. So we built the court. We did a one-day tournament. We did lessons. We moved the panels and we played doubles. It was working, but there was this one day that I was absolutely convinced that this was a good idea. And it was a Saturday afternoon. I came into the club. The club you see there has 7 ASB courts. But as I came in that Saturday afternoon and I heard that there was someone playing, but I couldn't see any lights turned on, when I came around the corner and I saw that the two of our players had chosen to train in the court that you have on screen right now, over 7 open ASB courts, I knew that we had something in hand. And that was like my final turning point to decide that we needed to do something and go outdoors. So this was the first application. To the left, you can see the abandoned, unutilized space. This is in a public school in San Salvador. And to the right is how we ended up adapting the space so that we could have a half squash court and a 3/4 squash court. So what we did there is, during the physical education class, we had all the kids for 5 weeks to come through the squash courts and receive their physical education class as a squash class. And after 5-6 weeks of teaching the basics, etc., we recruited or we selected a group of around 60 kids that they would be receiving their physical education class as a squash class. Now, the picture in your screen right now, I think it's very important because, and I keep saying this, to teach what you see in the screen right now, you don't need a regular, really expensive court. For the basics, for the introduction to the game, we coaches need to be more creative, to find ways to get the ball out there, to get rackets out there that we can have kids exposed to the game, and hence find more hidden talent probably out there. This is an overview. You can see in the middle of the screen how the two courts look. Now, unfortunately, schools have been closed for almost a year now. And the word out there says that kids won't be allowed to school probably until June, July, hopefully. The positive thing is that, ironically, all the sporting activities are allowed. So all the tennis academies, soccer academies, they're all running. So we didn't want to wait for schools to reopen and continue with our outdoor endeavor. So that's how this was born at the end of last year, and we basically opened it 5 weeks ago. So what you just saw there, and what you will have in your screens right now, it's our scaled version now, where we had the opportunity to build 4 squash courts, as the ones you see on the screen. And the first objective of the courts is to serve our urban squash program. Squash Para Todos is a partner program of the PSA Foundation. We follow the Squash and Education Alliance model. Basically, I was inspired by the Squash and Education Alliance, worked for one of their programs in San Diego. So our first objective is that this court will help us serve underserved youth from the public school system or at-risk communities in San Salvador. And in the afternoons, it becomes like a private squash academy or a life and fitness center, much more accessible price-wise. And the idea is that through the squash courts, through the cafeteria, bar area, the shop that we have, and the physical fitness service that we will offer, we will raise funds, or the income that this generates will help make the whole urban squash program completely auto-sustainable in the future. So as of the private part and also the social part that we're doing, what I'm really aiming for is the love for the game. I've been around the game since 1989, and for the last years, I could see how every time a new player would come in, especially juniors, we'd start selling them the idea of travel, national team, scholarships, and they fall in love with all this, but they don't fall in love with the game. And once something goes wrong, they quit the game. So I want to change the order of the factors, and I want to teach and spread the love of the game first, the game as a community, following a lot the examples of how pickleball and paddle are growing their sport. And then if you want to be a competitive player, there'll be plenty of space and plenty of chances where you can address that. But our main objective is to teach the game of squash as a game, to encourage the practice of the game of squash as another physical activity, as if you would go out for a run, a bicycle ride, your regular soccer match weekly. That's what I'm aiming for. That's how I grew up learning the game. It was in the late 80s. It was all community. It was all friends. It was all fun. And at the same time, it was very, very competitive. Actually, I believe that the best squash played in the region was during those times, where the courts weren't probably the best courts, but people were actually loving the game. Now, the benefits, the model of the court I've created, it has the same length, it has the same width. And what I did, as I mentioned before, I basically shaved off the side walls and the back walls to be 1 meter 20 centimeters height. Now, the first thing and the most important part is safety. Besides the openness that the short walls give us, and in coronavirus context, that creates a lot of sense of safety, It's the general safety of having the opportunity to be aware of what's happening in all the courts at the same time. We didn't have resources to build glass courts. And if I would have built the full squash court with concrete walls, the picture we have in the screen right now, we wouldn't see through. So I would lose a lot of sight as a coach or as a monitor of the complex. And safety wise, we need to be aware of what's happening inside the courts. Closed courts could be a place where vandalism can occur or something like that. So having the short walls with the resources I had guaranteed the safety of the participants. Now, the court itself, because of the measurements of the side walls, create two very interesting things. And it's the accuracy and precision the players will acquire by learning the game under these conditions, and the style of game that the court itself will produce. While testing it, I proved the natural human ability to adapt. And for those that were existing players, first minutes, they kind of saw that something was missing. But eventually, they figured and they saw that they were already playing the game under those measurements, so they adapted quickly. And for those newcomers, they had no other point of reference. So for them, the court is like that, and they just adapt. And what basically happens is that because of the fear of hitting the ball out of bounds, I've seen that players now are more in this courts are more aware of technical aspects of the game. So they are more aware of doing the right movements so that they don't fly the ball out of courts. And what that produces is more accurate and precise players. And during match play, because of that same fear, the game becomes much, much faster, much, much lower, and much more aggressive. So once the players go to the traditional court, after learning in courts like this, the transition will be much better, and I'm sure we will have better players. Now, another thing that has happened is the different perspectives I can get as a coach and as a player. With this type of courts, I can be in one court as a coach, and I can be coaching 2 or 3 courts at the same time, really interacting with the players on the other courts, using players on the other courts as an example as for the players that I'm in the court with at that moment. So there's more control. And as a coach, I can also have access to new angles that I can see the players, and I can work on technical aspects of the game. More integration, and this has been the factor that has had the most approval among the players playing in the courts right now. And it's that they absolutely love the idea of interacting with their peers on the adjacent courts or around the courts. Kids are not feeling lonely inside those high walls, and that integration and that ability to, or that possibility to see through courts and all around has given them a real sense of being part of something. Like now, and I've said it, when a team enters a squash facility and starts a team training, it's actually individual trainings, because everybody gets into one court and you lose track or you lose sight of all your other teammates. With this type of courts, you can be seeing your teammates even though if you are in your own private court. When you're doing solo, but you can see the guy on the other court, the player on the other court, and kind of interact. So it's less lonely, and hence I've figured and I've found out that that's something that people are really, really keen to. And the last part is less desertion, and this is more and this is how we want to use the outdoor courts and this other type of courts is all our students will start in these outdoor courts, and after reaching certain level of skill, a certain skill level, they will be awarded a scholarship where they will get the chance to go to the real ASB court facilities that we also run, and where they will receive all the benefits the program has to offer them. So that way, when we get the kids to the real courts, I'm almost sure that those that will get there will not leave. As of what's happening right now, that a lot of people go, play for a month, 6 months, a year, and for one reason or another, they end up quitting And that way, or this way, I believe I'll be making I'll be making a more efficient use of the money and a better way to use the expensive courts we all know right now. The biggest benefit of all is the price. I managed to build 4 squash courts for $24,000. I wouldn't build half a squash court in El Salvador, at least, for that money. The 60, 65 players that are already playing in the first 5 weeks, they wouldn't be playing squash. So I believe this should be a lot of alarms should set off for federations, World Squash Federation, that we need to take away that belief that we need an official court to teach and make the game popular. For me, we need to find other ways that we can practice the game of squash in some sort. Like you can practice soccer anywhere, you can catch a baseball anywhere, you can play Australian football in the streets probably. We need to find ways that kids and players in general can practice a part of the game without the need of the regular court. So that's what we are doing. We're planning on building more centers and really replicating this around El Salvador and Central America. And for our second center, or actually the idea was to build 7 courts in this center. So we had a campaign that we were raising funds, and it ends up at the end of March, where we were raising funds to build 3 more courts here. But after seeing the acceptance of other sports venues that want us to build courts at their facilities, we've decided that we'll build a second facility. With these funds that we raise, we will build the second facility, just as the one that you just saw, in this tennis complex. And I think this is very important because we need to make friends with other sports. We cannot be by ourselves, all hidden in the bunkers we've been. And I think that being right in the middle of 8 tennis courts will make a lot of impact in the growth of our game. I will be sharing in the chat the link of our campaign. We have a $10,000 promise if we reach, or when we reach the 20,000 mark. So we're basically $8,000 away from building 4 more courts and bringing the game of squash to more people. So if anybody here wants to add up and believe that this is a good way to take the game out there and want to support us, we will be more than happy to accept your support. So that will be it for me. Kansi, if you have any questions.
Yes, there's actually a lot of questions here. Okay, so there was one right in front of me. I don't know where it went. It was super interesting. Yeah, here. Okay, so this is a question from Billy. What kind of floor do you use, and how do you drain water from the courts in outdoor squash courts, or keeping dust free in hotter climates?
Yeah. So the courts right now, my idea was to build the cheapest court possible, like the 1.0 court. And the floors right now, they are concrete floors. I learned to play the game of squash in concrete floors. I played 11 years in concrete courts. I know they work perfectly, especially for the beginning part of the game. I'm not pretending people to play their whole lives in concrete floors. I know it's probably not healthy and that wood floors are a better option. But for now and for the resources we have, it's basically playing in a hard court tennis court. Drainage, well, the court has its drainage system and it has some holes on the side walls that were water drains perfectly. So if it rains, you just wait for rain to stop like tennis does, or you just don't play. But if it's a fast rain, it will drain quickly and you can keep on playing.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And one more question. So this is a question by Nathan John Taylor. Does National Squash Associations have a plan or upcoming plan of how to facilitate building outdoor courts in their communities?
Well, I haven't heard any intention from our federation to go on the outdoors. This is fairly new. I wish they did. I think this type of projects help a lot federations, because right now, or how can this project help is federations can come to these centers. They don't have to run the centers, but if there's centers like this, they can come and do their talent research, and from this type of courts, bring the talented players to the federation facilities, and then provide the high performance training the kids will need and the federation will provide. But for now, there's no support from federations. I don't see any interest from federations, and we should not feel discouraged by this. I think that federations, they do what they can. They have limited resources. They have limited people, and it's up to us and people like everybody, all the speakers today, that we do our part within our own expertise areas to add up and make the job of federations a little bit easier.
Thank you so much, Carlos. We really appreciate your time.